Hello, welcome to the instructional slides that accompany the lesson module for identifying and preventing food waste. Please be sure that you have administered the pre-instructional student assessment before beginning any instruction. This is also a reminder to make a copy of the entire set of instructional slides for your use before starting to teach. Some of the slides require customization for your school. Additional instruction guides are provided in the Notes section at the bottom of each slide when it is not in slideshow mode. This video is just an overview to model how the activities and tasks align with the flow of the lesson objectives. So let's begin. I always like to let my students know what the agenda is, that we'll identify wasted food and its cost, investigate whether it's legal to donate surplus food, analyze where we can find sources of surplus food in our community, and then we're going to act together in partnership with Pete's Garden and Kids Feeding Kids to prevent food waste and donate food in our community. You'll notice that this is one slide where you'll want to personalize it with the name of your high school. The overall objective, of course, is to analyze the potential for surplus food recovery in your home, classroom, or community and apply your understanding of safe food handling to reduce hunger for local families. The lesson kicks off with an activity to generate interest and excitement in the module with your students. You'll want to be sure that you have printed off the cards that accompany the activity so students can participate. And arrange your students in teams. I would recommend at least a shoulder partner, but certainly no more than 4 students per team. And then just set them up for success in explaining how the activity works. As you move through the activity and the slides that accompany it, you'll notice that you do, again, need to be sure you're working in slideshow mode in order to access the animations. So students will have an opportunity to decide what the original price, retail price was of, for example, in this first one, the bag of salad. Give them a few minutes to make a note of that on their scorecards, and then, only then, will you announce that 40% of lettuce that is purchased is wasted. And so they'll give them time to calculate what, based on the retail price that they've written down, what is the cost that is lost based on this 40% average. Okay. So there's built-in timers here that can help you with that. Maybe your students won't need the full 15 seconds, but they're there for you if you need them. You'll continue to move through the activity in the same way, right? Always asking for the retail price first and then offering what the amount wasted is so that they can calculate that. There are 5 items and they've all been chosen because of research I've done to figure out what are the most wasted products that we buy and take into our household. After a winner has been proclaimed, and the winner is a team or a person who is within $1 of the actual highs and lows, you will move on to a group discussion here to further the discussion into thinking about what are the environmental resources that were also wasted just producing the item, and what maybe are the long-term impacts of wasted food on the environment. After doing the Price is Right activity, you will want to give each student a blank guided notes sheet. These are going to be available to you. There's a student version and a teacher version that has all of the quote-unquote answers that the students would be capturing on their guided notes. The guided notes follow the order of the slides, so you don't have to worry that you're jumping around in an order that the students won't be able to follow. The first thing we want to do is examine the definitions between food loss and food waste. They are actually quite different, even though sometimes we find that these words are used interchangeably. Food loss occurs from harvest to retail. It begins with production or farming, and it's often due to some of the items that I have listed here for you in the slide. Again, using the animations of the slide, you can continue to discuss the issue of food loss with your students and educate them that it begins in production, but it also occurs after harvest, during food processing, like maybe manufacturing ketchup or orange juice, whatever, and then on through the distribution phase, and that's where the products are actually being transported. Again, that can be produce itself, or it can be processed foods. Food waste, though, occurs at the retail, food service, household level. Okay, it is not. Food loss and food waste are very different in where they occur in the cycle. Again, it happens at the retail or consumer level, and when I use that word retail here, I am considering things like restaurants, grocery stores, right? Any place that we're purchasing as a consumer. I think it's great that we ground the lesson in ideas about how we as consumers can do certain daily things to prevent as much food waste as possible. So this slide follows the guided notes and asks students to record some basic information from this so that they feel equipped to go home and at least try some of these solutions. From there, we want to examine, though, that even though households contribute 40%, so almost half of food waste, there are other sources that contribute to it. And we can see here that between restaurants and hotels, the scope of the hospitality industry contributes another 30% to the food waste issues. And that retail, supermarkets, and then what we call big box, like wholesale clubs, Costco, Sam's, contribute another 6%. So that's another 19%. And we participate in all of these areas regularly. I mean, our parents maybe go to office buildings and we have some food waste through schools and other avenues, but these are the biggest contributors to the issue. So how do we begin to address that when these things happen outside of our house? One of the biggest misconceptions about why food has to be wasted, so to speak, or thrown away and can't be donated is really a very outdated and actually quite false belief that many people in the food service industry continue to hold on to today. I think it's important that before watching the video that you see embedded here on your screen, that you make absolutely sure you know where your students fall in terms of whether cooked food can be donated or not. I think you'll find that the majority of your students, perhaps even all of them, even those that are already working in the industry, will tell you that they themselves believe that food cannot be donated from a restaurant, or that their managers or owners of the establishments where they're working insist that food can't be donated, it has to be thrown out. So I would encourage you to use some of the best teaching practices that I've embedded in the notes section of the slide to make sure you know where your students fall on that continuum. I would not necessarily confirm their true or false at this point. I would find out where they stand, but then I would go ahead and let them know that we're going to watch this video. They're going to take notes about 3 different situations where chefs or caterers have excess food, and that the goal as they watch and listen is to take note of what they learned about food donations that surprised the people in the video. And I think those surprises will also surprise your students, and you'll be able to have a robust conversation about that. I'm not going to play the video for you here, but it is only about 5 minutes long. So I encourage you, though, to watch it before you teach this activity to your students. And I've also, in the teacher guide, created the high points for you, for those of you who don't necessarily have time to take the notes yourself. Oh, it looks like it's going to play, but I'll skip over that for you, hopefully. There you are. After demystifying that food can actually be donated legally and there are liability protections in place, it's time to introduce Tamara Weber, who is our founder and executive director of Pete's Garden. And Tamara wondered, right, why do some restaurants, hotels, and grocery stores donate food, but others don't? And how could she address this issue personally once she was made aware of it? And she's just a great example of why everyone has the capacity to create solutions. So from there, Tamara has created this little quick under 5-minute video of Tamara talking about how she was inspired to start Pete's Garden and Kids Feeding Kids, and how her food waste solution has expanded from Kansas City to reach students in almost 50 high schools now across Kansas, Missouri, and even in Illinois. If you'll notice here, I'd love it if you could embed your school's mascot or the name of your school here, or however, just to get students thinking about, after listening to Tamara's story, how can your community and your students get involved with also addressing some of these issues. And very specifically, just allowing students to really see that we are very dedicated to this work, especially in terms of equitably finding ways for more families to experience having healthy family meals together. From there, we hope that your students and you are feeling inspired by Tamara's story. And so it's time now to spend time talking about how you and they will be joining Pete's Garden and Kids Feeding Kids to donate meals responsibly and possibly even encourage food donations in your community. These on this slide, you're going to see the food donation safety laws that Tom Colicchio spoke of in the video that the students have just watched prior to getting this far in the lesson. And the 2 pieces of legislation are the Good Samaritan Food Donations Act, and followed by the Food Donation Improvement Act. Those are both those both form the foundation for the liability protections. However, there are often state and local codes or regulations that further support these efforts to not only increase the liability protections of donors, but also to place more pressure, so to speak, on businesses to make sure that they are donating. And in my research, California really stood out as a 5-star example that by 2024, which was last year, all cities and counties in California were required to adopt food recovery programs for all food service entities. And it's pretty remarkable that they continue to be a front runner in these types of environmental and social concerns. There's a link here where you and your students can investigate other states, including your own. I'm not going to give it away right now, so enjoy finding out what's happening in your personal state. However, just remember that these laws are there to enable all of us to take action in different ways to prevent good food from being wasted. This doesn't just have to be cooking and donating. It could be that if you find that your state is lagging behind adding additional reinforcement to these federal legislations, then maybe you and your students want to get involved with advocating or lobbying for strengthening local regulations. We've learned through safe food handling, through the video that we watched with Tom Colicchio and the other chefs, that safe food handling is a key component of donating good food in good faith. So it's important that we review the practices with your students to ensure that everyone understands the importance of food safety when we're making food donations. Food safety in our kitchens isn't just for the customers with the ability to pay, right? It includes when we're handling food for donation. There's a word bank for the missing words that you can either read aloud or put on a whiteboard somewhere and give students time to work it out among themselves what the missing words are and where they should be placed. Then, if you didn't catch it, I just transitioned to a different slide and the answers will appear and you can all check to see that everybody has a good, solid understanding of some personal hygiene and health practices. From there, please review temperature control and shelf life. Again, for those of you who may need a refresher yourself, the way to address this is presented in your teacher version of the guided notes, and there are also additional notes in the notes section under this slide. Food donation labeling must reflect that allergens might be present. We follow that on both the Pete's Garden and Kids Feeding Kids side. So if you look closely at our Kids Feeding Kids label that is already on the top of your food containers, I would recommend that you have one of those handy so you can show your students that we are supporting responsible labeling. So this is just a good reminder of what those allergens are, which I'm sure you probably already covered at some point in your school year. This slide may be optional for some of you, depending on the status of your kitchen, but I always recommend that our schools ask the donation agency or program if they accept food prepared in an uninspected kitchen. Sometimes some of the schools that we work with or partner with, they might not have a principality that requires their school kitchen to be inspected, their classroom lab kitchen that is. And So we don't want to ever make any assumptions about that, but I would say it's always wise, regardless of whether your kitchen lab is health code inspected or not, to always be sure that when you're talking with the agency that you're planning to donate meals to, that you ask them what their requirements are for accepting cooked food donations. We find that some places say they don't have any restrictions and others will. So please, again, use this slide as your discretion, at your discretion, to talk this through with your students if they're helping you plan where they are going to donate their meals. And then I always like to make sure that we clarify that like Tamara, you and your students, virtually everyone, can do something to improve the systems and policies for reducing food waste and increasing our ability to get nutritious meals into the hands of families who need help. Even if your students don't intend to pursue a career in the hospitality industry, each of us can find a way to improve the system. This includes farmers, food manufacturers, retailers, food service operations of all kinds, and consumers. So you could use this slide as a way to just reinforce that there are other ways to address this issue that they can get involved with. And that as a result of having all these different ways, they and you are going to embark on a project funded by Kids Feeding Kids. This is where you're going to see a big slide that in red over here says teachers. This is meant to highlight to you that before you start teaching any of this lesson, please review the next series of slides that I'm going to show you and decide what type of project you want your students to complete before you start launching them in the direction you want to go. Because otherwise, if they see all of these next options, I think they're going to be confused. Now, if you're a teacher who's going to give them an option of what kind of project they want to do, that's fine, but just please be advised. So what you're going to see next are some choices. First, you could have your students work on a PSA campaign, right? A public service announcement. And what I've created here for you on the slide is what the objective would be. If you want to do any cross-content collaborations with other classes in your school, this would be a great option to choose. There's no cooking involved with this particular project, so it might be suitable for some of your other classes that you're teaching that are non-cooking classes, or maybe you have a week where you want to take a break from cooking, and this could be something that your students could do instead of cooking or in addition to, doesn't matter. So this slide gives you the basics of how to create a PSA campaign, and then even gives you kind of an example of what that PSA could look like, okay, with a call to action. So those two slides go together. The next option that you have for creating a project could be that maybe you and your students want to try to source some of the ingredients from surplus. So basically at this point, you're trying to impact food loss, not necessarily food waste, because what you're trying to find maybe is a grower or a grocery store, or maybe even the people in your school cafeteria, who have, let's say they have 20 pounds of onions that's going to be lost if they don't find somebody to use them. And so maybe those onions can be used in the recipe that you do plan to make for your traditional Kids Feeding Kids meal. But that's going to take some planning, right? And you're going to have to know who and where can I get some of those surplus ingredients from. and how will I get them here? So this would be sort of an add-on type element to the traditional Kids Feeding Kids meal project. This is also, though, a great place to start thinking about um, the scraps and things that are generated in your food kitchen, and whether agricultural classes could use that for compost, or animal husbandry classes for animal feed. So just be thinking along those lines. If you decide to use this project, this slide would maybe help you communicate with students that you're going to have to map out where are these surplus ingredients, and how are we going to locate them, right? The third option is what I'm calling the Restaurant Recovery Week option, and that's where you actually, again, go back to a mapping tool like perhaps the ones that I've suggested here, and you are actually trying to locate and map out two different things. You're trying to map out what are all the local food service entities in our area, and what are all the options where we either find food pantries or places where people could pick up meals if we could get enough restaurants to contribute their surplus food. So again, this would be a great project for cross-content collaboration. Maybe your graphics design class or entrepreneurship classes could get involved with helping you craft the message that you'd want to send out to all the restaurants or food service entities. But again, this one is going to be completely different. This is basically you're trying to simulate what we do at Pete's Garden, just for one time to see if you can make it happen. Personally, I think that even if you could get one or two restaurants to do this kind of a project with, that it would just be kind of an interesting thing, right? To see, for students to see that these types of solutions can be had. It just takes a community of people willing to try. And then your fourth option is to continue doing or repeating a traditional Kids Feeding Kids cooking project. And I know that you already know how to pull that off, but I would still say that even at this level, again, you can still incorporate food waste reduction habits by cross-content collaboration, like collecting your food scraps to be composted by the ag class, maybe event planning in terms of how the distribution is going to happen. That could happen in your hospitality and tourism classes, or just involving your community service clubs in some way. So again, 4 options. I would strongly encourage you, before you begin teaching the lesson though, to make sure that you know which direction you want to send your kids. By the way, those 4 options for doing a project are also listed in a single page that is on the 3rd page of the guided notes. You don't necessarily even have to print those out if you're not planning to give your students any options about what project they do. So you're finished with the teaching, quote unquote, part of the food waste module, and are now ready to dive into your actual project. I've tried to time this out for you so that you know pretty much how much time you need to teach this module. And I think you should probably allow, if you're a 45 or 50-minute class period, I would think that you'll need 2 class periods to go through all of the information. If you're someone who has a 90-minute or entire morning class, entire afternoon class, you can probably get through everything in one class period. But I'll leave that up to you to decide. Once you have completed your project, then please remember to administer the post-instructional survey so that we can capture that growth in learning outcomes. I hope you enjoy the lesson and the module as much as I enjoyed putting it together, and I look forward to seeing the results of how everything comes together for you. Thanks for taking some time to familiarize yourself with this material.